Hello, everyone. My name is Norm Pasquale. I am the co-chair of Ontario Place for All. Welcome to tonight's presentation of A Better Idea. I would like to start tonight's presentation with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you for joining us tonight for the presentation of A Better Idea. As I mentioned, my name is Norm Pasquale. I am the co-chair of Ontario Place for All. We are a grassroots organization who wants to ensure Ontario Place redevelopment follows core principles of waterfront revitalization. Former Premier Bill Davis, who was the Premier at the time of Ontario Place's opening, said, "Public interest, not commercial interest, must drive the vision of Ontario Place." We agree with this statement so much that it is part of our core values. It is why we oppose the current redevelopment proposal, which prioritizes commercial interest over the needs and the wants of the general public. In the interest of restarting this process with public interest at the forefront, we have proposed a way forward to make a fresh start together on Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre called A Better Idea, reimagining both of these sites as a revitalized 21st century public space. Ontario Science Centre architect Raymond Moriyama said about the ravine and green space he built the Science Centre around, "Touch the least, enhance whatever is there." It is this approach that guided our group's work on enhancing and revitalizing spaces that are cultural public icons of Ontario, that need careful and thoughtful revitalization so they can be enjoyed by the public for decades to come. I'd like to recognize some elected officials who have come down to learn more about A Better Idea, including MP Mary Margaret McMahon. Thank you for coming. And we have staff from a few offices, including new Deputy Mayor Asma Malik's office. At this point, I'd like to read a short message from Deputy Mayor Asma Malik and City Councillor here in Spadina, Fort York, Ward 10. So Councillor Malik says, as local city councillor for Ontario Place and 401 Richmond, I am so pleased to share words of welcome to everyone participating in person and those joining virtually. Your care and commitment to the importance of Ontario Place and its future is so critical to discussion of its future of this treasured public space. I want to thank the Ontario Place for All team for their dedication and thoughtful contribution to this public discourse through the Better Idea presentation. It is through robust, transparent, and public discussion that we can achieve the best that is possible from public spaces like Ontario Place. I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation and working with all of you on a future that we can all be proud of. And now a few short words from our local MPP, Chris Glover. I want to thank all the members of Ontario Place for All for their tireless advocacy to fight for a public vision of Ontario Place. I also want to thank all of you for attending tonight's event. Events like this, the thousands of petitions signed, and the constant media attention have made the fight for Ontario Place a major issue in all parts of the province. Premier Robarts commissioned Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre to celebrate our beautiful province and envision its future. These were to be places for all Ontarians. The Ford government's current proposal to obliterate every tree, bird, plant, and animal on the West Island and build a giant Austrian mega spa has nothing to do with celebrating Ontario. To facilitate the privatization with a $650 million taxpayer subsidy and a 95-year lease is a scandal on the scale of the recent Greenbelt scandal. The worst part would be the division of Ontarians if this mega spa is built, with those who can afford the spa on the inside looking out and those who can't afford it on the outside looking in. Instead of uniting and celebrating Ontarians, the mega spa would divide us. I want to thank Ontario Place for All for providing an alternative vision to the privatization scheme, one that protects the environmental ecosystem and keeps it open for all. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Ken Greenberg, who will walk us through a better idea proposal. Ken Greenberg is an urban designer, teacher, writer, former director of urban design and architecture for the City of Toronto, and principal of Greenberg Consultants. For over 4 decades, he has played a pivotal role on public and private assignments in urban settings throughout North America and Europe, focusing on the rejuvenation of downtowns, waterfronts, neighborhoods, and campuses, as well as community planning. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you very much, Norm. Welcome everybody here in the room with us and everybody online. We're really excited to have this opportunity to try to change the conversation around Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre, and to offer what we think is a much better idea. I think we all know by this point, with all the press and attention that has gone to what has been happening on both these sites, what's wrong with them. There is massive dissatisfaction. Thousands of people, not only in Toronto, but throughout the province, have expressed their opposition to the Therm Megaspa and to the moving of the Ontario Science Centre. The Megaspa, it is obviously way too big, too private, internally focused on its own costly amenities, sealed off behind a steep paywall. But to make it even worse, to be viable, it requires a major parking garage. In fact, this will be one of the largest parking garages of its kind in the world, 2,100 cars on Lakeshore Boulevard, and the taxpayers of Ontario, you, us, are being asked to pay for it. And then, to top it all off, there's a 95-year secret lease, and we're not allowed to know any of the terms of that lease. And I think we all know nothing lasts for 95 years, and the chances of this just turning into a piece of property which can be used for pretty much anything once, even if the spa had a period of success, once that success ends, is very high. To make it even more egregious, let's look at the environmental assessment. The major generator of environmental impacts, lake filling, terrestrial and aquatic habitats, tree removal, CO2 emissions related to the 21-car garage, visual impacts from the massive megaspa, has astonishingly, unbelievably been exempted from the environmental assessment. So the environmental assessment is just looking at the landscaping surrounding the megaspa, surrounding Live Nation, and doesn't pay attention to the things that will cause the greatest environmental impacts. This defies all logic and common sense. Those are the areas in gray that you see on the slide. So look at these two images. On the right, you see a fairly recent image of the West Island of Ontario Place. On the left, you see an image around the time it was created in 1970. The trees were just planted. So imagine that 850 50-year-old trees will be demolished, the trees that were planted 50 years ago. But also look in that image and look at downtown Toronto. The only 2 towers that existed were the first 2 towers of TD Bank. No City Place, no Liberty Village, the Kings didn't exist, no high-rise buildings, in fact. So the hundreds of thousands of people who've come to live in the area shown in that slide were not there 50 years ago. They're the people who are currently using and enjoying Ontario Place. Then we learned about the last-minute surprise announcement that the Ontario Science Centre will be moved from Don Mills atop a 2,100-car garage in the shadow of the Megaspa, and this has caused great consternation in Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park in those neighborhoods. There's so many things that are odd about this. If you look at the diagram on the left, You go into a pavilion in the Science Center, then to get to the pods, you dip down into a tunnel in the parking garage, and then you have to climb up from the tunnel to get back up to the existing bridge to the pods designed by Eberhard Zeidler, which is tucked in, completely hidden behind the gigantic pavilion, entry pavilion for the spa. I've used this iceberg to illustrate an RFP that Infrastructure Ontario has put out for the design of that facility. 4/5 of the building, and it's a building, is parking garage. That's all below the water level, and quite literally below the water level. And the little bit of white ice on top, that is the Science Center, and in essence, the contractors are being asked to design the Science Center. So, people know what we're against, Ontario Place for All, but they're asking, what are we for? And this presentation is our answer. We want to offer a better idea as an invitation to the province and the city to make a fresh start. In simplest terms, what we're proposing is to leverage the Ontario line at both ends, connecting the Don River Valley to the Lake Ontario waterfront, linking our two most prominent natural features, the Don Valley being the most significant of our ravines or valleys. I guess along with the Humber. I don't want to belittle the Humber. This will revitalize Ontario Place. We're going to show how we can get affordable housing built in Flemington Park and enhance the Ontario Science Center instead of destroying it. So here's a diagram. The Ontario line, under construction now and disrupting all our lives, I might add, 15.6 kilometers, 15 stops, cutting diagonally through the city. So giving access to people from all over the city to these great natural features, our waterfront at Ontario Place and the Don Valley at the Ontario Science Center. And at both cases, major investment in intermodal transit. So at Ontario Place, a brand new spectacular station is being built at Exhibition Place, serving Ontario Place, which will have all-day 15-minute headway GO service, have the 509 LRT, and also have the stop for the Ontario line. At the other end, the Eglinton LRT and two subway stops, the Flemington Park station and the aptly named Ontario Science Center station, although now they want to change the name to make us forget that. And one of them, and I'm going to talk about each in turn, one of them gives us access to the Don Valley, the other to the lake. The number one principle of sustainability is to start by using what you have. Don't destroy what you have, use it well. So we have inherited, we as a society, we as an urban area, we have inherited two highly awarded projects, Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Center. In the afterglow of Expo 67, centennial year, the progressive conservative government of the day, and that's the bitter irony, John Robarts and Bill Davis commissioned the best designers we had, architect Eberhard Zeidler, landscape architect Michael Huff, and architect Ray Moriyama, to design these very significant facilities as the centennial legacy of the Progressive Conservative Party. And this is what this government is proposing to trash right now, to trash that legacy. Here's a sketch that Eb Zeidler drew of how he understood what he was doing. Look at the first line, the creation of urban parkland. Now, this was a very special kind of parkland because it introduced things that we're talking about today, letting people eat and drink in the park. What a novel idea. This was 50 years ago. A beautiful pond, places for kids to play, but also a glorious aspect of nature, an archipelago of islands, getting people away from a hard seawall and getting them to enjoy access to water penetrating the islands. We've been fed this lie constantly by Doug Ford and his ministers and provincial staff that Ontario Place is a wasteland. Nobody goes there. Nobody is using it. Everything can be trashed. There's nothing to be saved. Well, these wonderful photographs by Francesca Bauan, who's right here, part of Ontario Place for All, show how people year-round, through the winter, all seasons, have been using and enjoying Ontario Place. And leaving aside all the attractions, like Live Nation, 1.4 million people visited Ontario Place in the last year. And during COVID, we learned how absolutely essential that is. So our idea, our better idea, is build on the legacy that we have inherited. And in the case of Ontario Place, enhance the West Island, integrate it with an idea that's long been around, and Lesley Lewis will talk more about this, of a satellite of the Ontario Science Centre. Not moving the whole Science Centre, but a satellite that would occupy the pods and the Cinesphere, and link that satellite to the West Island as an outdoor expression of the Science Centre experience. So you have both using the remarkable architectural legacy and the landscape legacy of Michael Huff. The parking lots on Lakeshore Boulevard can be repurposed. And then what's really interesting, and this is something David Crombie and I worked on many years ago, and we almost got there, David, a merger of Exhibition Place and Ontario Place. Put them together, you have 350 acres, a glorious public space now wired to all this new transportation, all the new trails. And so what all these arrows indicate is the opportunity to connect it and make Ontario Place this great public place, allow the Martin Goodman Trail to come out and circumvent the island, which you can do partially. And it has remarkable opportunity. So we have proof of concept. And ironically, this proof of concept, Trillium Park, was developed by guess who? Infrastructure Ontario, working with Waterfront Toronto, one of the best waterfront agencies in the world, supported by, guess what? 3 levels of government, including the province of Ontario. And we have seen the 3 hectares of land. It's pretty small, but how wonderful that can be. So here's the scorecard when you compare the 2 alternatives, the private mega spa or Ontario Place for All. What we're proposing is the cheapest to build for taxpayers. It's the most environmentally friendly. It creatively reuses existing buildings, low carbon. It's the most fun for people. It frees up taxpayers' money to revitalize the Science Centre and build necessary housing. So what we're saying is the West Island can be transformed into a much needed, I'm not going to take that as a commentary on what I'm saying, into a much needed and improved public park, leveraging the existing mature 50-year-old tree canopy. And this transformed waterfront park can be achieved at significantly less cost, estimated at approximately $70 million based on an extrapolation with inflation from the cost of Trillium Park. So not $650 million to build a parking garage and the servicing for the spa of public money, $70 million of public money. Better still, it would avoid landfill operations, which carry significant potential cost for cost overruns and result in more acres of publicly accessible open space than the spa. So let's go to the Ontario Science Centre. And this is a sketch that came from Ray Moriyama. So we saw Eberhard Zeidler's sketch. Ray Moriyama's sketch, way ahead of his time, was again about linking to nature, about building a science center that would drop down into the Don Valley, give people access to the valley, take full advantage of the valley. And again, as in the case of Ontario Place, we've been fed the lie over and over that The Science Center is dead meat. Nobody goes there. It's old and tired. It can't be saved. It has to be destroyed. And I think these pictures, again, give the lie. And the people from the area and the people who are using the Science Center are constantly telling us that's absolutely not true. Now, the half-size Science Center that's being proposed for the replacement down at Ontario Place, we're told may eliminate 3 of the key programs: the rainforest, the planetarium, and the adventure playground. No room. So why on earth would we do that? So let's look at the site up on Don Mills Road. How can we build on that legacy? How can we enhance the Science Center and integrate it with the emerging transit-oriented community at Don Mills and Eglinton, taking advantage of the LRT and the 2 subway stops? And it turns out the City of Toronto owns a band of land, the parking lots on Don Mills Road. We've estimated that 1,000 units of housing could comfortably be built on those lands. So all the talk about dealing with housing, the opportunity is there. And in fact, you can't build housing where Doug Ford was talking about building it on the footprint of the Science Center, because the Conservation Authority is telling us, didn't we learn any lessons from Hurricane Hazel? That it's in the hazard lands. So you simply can't build there. But you can build on the tableland, the parking lots, and let's say for the sake of argument, we're saying 30% of those 1,000 housing units should be affordable housing. That's a good ratio. And what that would add to is all the housing that is being built on the Celestica site, on all 4 corners of that intersection. So depending on how big you draw a radius around those 2 stations, you could end up with anywhere from 30,000 to 90,000 people living at that transit-oriented community. And in addition to the Ontario Science Center, we have the Japanese Cultural Center, we have the Aga Khan Museum, and so the really good idea of not putting all the good things in downtown Toronto on the waterfront, but actually spreading them out equitably throughout our city made perfect sense. Thank you, progressive conservative government of 50 years ago. You did the right thing. So again, as in the case of the Science Center, look at all the new ways that can emerge, all the green trails connection systems linking not only from the Science Center, which Ray Moriyama had prophesized in a way, but from this new emerging neighborhood down into the valley, giving people access to green space. So again, let's look at the scorecard. It serves keeping Ontario, the Science Center, in place, serves Don Mills and Flemington Park communities. It's the most environmentally friendly. It creatively reuses existing buildings, again, low carbon. It leverages transit investment, the Ontario line, the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. It becomes a hub, it already is, for an expanding community, and it honors the architectural legacy. What it doesn't do is become the most expensive. So 50 years ago, we recognized the value of dispersal, as I said, of not having all good one-of-a-kind things downtown. That idea is still valid. The Ontario line and Crosstown LRT arrive right there, serving the new Science Center station. The Don Valley has a unique relationship with the Science Center, and it was designed by Ray Moriyama to take full advantage of that relationship. The City of Toronto owns parking lots on tableland with a combined area of approximately 5.2 acres, of 2.1 hectares, which can be used for mixed-use, mixed-income development, including 1,000 housing units. And as I said, a target for percentage of affordable housing units could be set at 30% or producing roughly 300 units. Now, let's pretend all we care about is the money, which, I think it's a reasonable assumption to say that's the way Doug Ford looks at the world. We commissioned a study, Ontario Place for All, in 2018 from HRNA, the world-renowned firm in looking from a fiscal, municipal, public sector standpoint at investment in public space. And they gave us the following advice. From a purely dollars and cents standpoint, the worst thing you could do is the spa. The best thing you could do is invest in open space. Cities are known for their great parks and open spaces. They said to us, don't squander the inherent value of this irreplaceable asset, when from a purely financial standpoint, an expansive and generous waterfront park network is a powerful economic development strategy for the city and the province. And with their vast experience, not only in the States where all these examples come from, but also work in Europe, they worked in England, they worked pretty much everywhere. They gave us example after example of cities that are investing in public space and reaping the rewards in terms of tourism, which the province seems to talk a lot about, in terms of attracting businesses, making people make location decisions, all of the reasons why we go to great cities. So here you see New York City, Dallas, Seattle, San Diego, Washington, Houston, Philadelphia, Boston, and the list goes on and on. I've just grabbed a few from their report. So here we are. We're now at a critical decision point. We believe there is a better idea, and it's staring us in the face. Just use what you have to best advantage. A better idea for Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre. We are, let's be honest, we're in a period of great vulnerability with the allure of the privatization agenda, short-term monetization of public assets, and these are irreplaceable. The visions for these two highly strategic public sites on the Toronto waterfront and the Don Valley, dating back 5 decades, are still valid. There's nothing wrong with them. We have to go back and say, why are we not recognizing what is hidden in plain sight? Their abandonment would be a tragically short-sighted mistake. What they need after decades of neglect is to be infused with new life, take on new roles, not obliterated. More needed than ever, given our population growth, their latent potential is even greater in the current context. To save them will require powerful public support and commitment. And that's why we're all here tonight. Norm, back to you.
Thank you, Ken, for that excellent presentation of a better idea. Now we need all of you to take action. So what we need from you is we need a critical mass to endorse a better idea. From all of you to resident associations to city builders to politicians of all stripes. Visit ontarioplaceforall.com/takeaction to ask your elected leader to endorse a better idea. And if your group or resident association wants to endorse a better idea, go to ontarioplaceforall.com/a-better-idea, and there is a form there for you to endorse a better idea and endorse a fresh start for Ontario Place and Ontario Science Centre, which they both so richly deserve. Thank you. Our next speaker is David Crombie. He's going to speak about, yes, indeed, he's going to speak about what's at stake for Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre. Brief introduction, David Crombie has been a politician, professor, and consultant. A popular mayor of Toronto from 1972 to 1978, he was affectionately referred to as the tiny perfect mayor. I like the woohoos. In federal politics from 78 to 88, he served as the PC member for Rosedale and held several cabinet positions, including Minister of Northern Affairs and Secretary of State and Minister of Multiculturalism. He subsequently chaired the Royal Commission on the Future of Toronto Waterfront. Thank you for that work. And from 2001 to 2007, served as President and CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute. More recently, he served in various advisory capacities to cities and provincial governments and remains an amazing advocate. David?
Thanks very much, Norm. And I haven't been in a room that's around for a while, so forgive me if I keep moving. I was supposed to be no, I'm just kidding. First of all, let me start by saying I've worked with Ken Greenberg on and off now for, I hate to admit it, somewhere around 50 years. It's true. And I've never, ever ceased to amaze myself as I watch him and listen to him, to what he's got to say. From the smallest to the largest things, Ken Greenberg has imagination, he has an elegance and an eloquence, which is really hard to match. So what you saw tonight is really, it's not the work of one person. Ken works with other people. But I'll tell you, this project bears Ken Greenberg's fingerprints everywhere. And I hope it's going to have the movement that Norm was talking about. Yeah. I was asked to do a less imaginative task, if you like, because we have this proposal for what's possible, but we also have a project that is already on the table, and that's the project from the provincial government. And it seems to me that, and I was asked if I would talk about what we need to do with that proposal. For many years, as most of you would know, all of you would know, I'm sure, that whenever there was an enormous amount of public investment, financial investment, also matched with significant environmental impacts, there was always done a comprehensive environmental impact study. It was automatic, at least it became automatic some years ago. However, the current project, one supported by the provincial government, as you would know, has not been subject to any of that kind of quality of scrutiny that a comprehensive environmental impact study would bring. Indeed, it's incredible, if you think about it, and Ken touched on it, it's incredible that the current environmental assessment, which is just finished, does not include the new, massive, privately owned commercial spa. Doesn't include that. It doesn't include the construction of some 800,000 square meters of car park facility. And it doesn't include the cutting down of 850 trees and the complete alteration of the West Island. The environmental study which the government's putting out these days does not include any assessment of those. That itself, at least with a small number of people, is a scandal that they're getting away with it and calling it an environmental study of the project. It's not. And that's why there's been a large number of organizations, people, citizens who are opposed to the project as strongly as they can. In fact, they're demanding that there be a comprehensive environmental impact study with baseline facts and the possibility of recommendations for things that need to be done. And they are joined, interesting enough, in that whole feeling that we need to do something. They're joined by some good professional organizations, not just citizens looking for better opportunity and better hope. The Toronto Association of Architects, the Ontario Association of Landscape Architects, the Design Review Committee that includes City of Toronto and Waterfront Toronto, all of them are asking for the same quality environmental impact study. But the provincial government remains unmoved. And it needs to be said, and maybe it's easier for me to say it than others, it needs to be said that it's betraying a pattern of behavior that exposes the way in which they do things, which was marked in her report, the Auditor General, the other day. They show, the provincial government, a stunning lack of interest and respect for the history, the culture, and the environmental values of the places they're working in. They have They have a preference for private interested groups over public interest, and indeed work to develop. When they do public policy, you will find that very often those private interests are trumping, the pun intended, are trumping public interest. And thirdly, they employ a kind of secrecy, a kind of corrupting of the public process. They use them in order to achieve their own goals. That's what they're doing in the Greenbelt. That's what they're doing here. Make no mistake about it. This is a major historic issue for this city, not only for us today, but for generations. Because what we now need to do, and why we're asking people to join in, talk to your friends, talk to the organizations, for sure, bug the politicians and political representatives of 3 levels of government. We need to have an environmental impact study that's comprehensive, that does the job. And if it's not important to us, and it is, indeed, we can say we should accept nothing less than that. Because I can tell you, because I have prophetic powers, that the next couple of generations are going to expect that we've done just that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. As usual, that was perfect. Our next speaker is Shirley Blumberg. She's going to speak about the value and legacy of Ontario Place and the Science Centre. Shirley is a founding member of KPMB Architects and a member of the Order of Canada for contributions for architecture and community. She's designed many of the firm's noteworthy and award-winning projects, which range in scale from interiors to architecture and planning. Shirley? Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to get my slides going. No, I think it's good. There we go. Marvelous. So I'm going to follow on from Ken's wonderful description of a better idea and focus on the value of legacy. I just wanted to thank Zeidler Architecture, Moriyama Toshima Architects, and Francesca Bowen for these wonderful photographs that are scrolling behind me. I'm going to start by setting the context, and I think that context could be characterized as a golden age. And as David has observed, we're certainly not in a golden age at the moment. The social, cultural, and economic transformation that came with unprecedented post-war growth and prosperity in the 1950s and 60s led to a national spirit of optimism. Canada's future looked bright. I know this because I emigrated in the early 70s. It was in this period that Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre were commissioned by the Progressive Conservative provincial government to celebrate Canada's centennial of 1967. By the late 1960s, the city had turned its back to the waterfront. With Ontario Place, the provincial government began the process of reversing that trend and transforming our waterfront into public space for people's enjoyment. As Ken has said, Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre were designed by 2 of Canada's finest architects of the time, Eberhard Zeidler and Raymond Moriyama. Esteemed landscape architect Michael Huff designed the islands and landscape of Ontario Place. He was way ahead of his time as an environmental advocate and his ambition to connect the city with nature. In this morning's Globe and Mail, Alex Bozakovic wrote, and I'm quoting, "In the mid-20th century, public buildings were the most prestigious jobs an architect could get. Avant-garde aesthetics and social democracy went together. Ontario Place, a waterfront park accented by cultural venues, was a shining example of this tradition. The same could be said for the Ontario Science Centre. These landmark institutions are a powerful legacy of the time, of the hopes and dreams that drove the growth of our province. Everyone in the room understands that all public institutions need renewal to keep them relevant. Unfortunately, these two suffered decades of neglect. Now is the time to honor their legacy, not destroy them. The sheer cultural and heritage quality of the architecture and landscape design should be enough to guarantee their preservation and renewal. One of the most remarkable characteristics that these institutions share is their profound connection to nature. It's hard to comprehend, as Ken has noted, that our provincial government is planning to clear cut half a century's worth of forest growth on the east and west islands of Ontario Place to literally pave the way for private commercial interests. We can all recall now how during the pandemic, our city parks, ravines, and waterfront were overrun with people. COVID was a stark reminder of how critical public green space is to our mental and physical health and well-being. To put that in context, in 2019, an extensive study conducted by the University of Aarhus in Denmark and conducted over several decades was published. It revealed that the more time children spend playing in nature, the lower the chances are of developing mental health disorders. Ken has eloquently described a better idea for the future of Ontario Place in the Ontario Science Centre. For a fraction of the cost, a better idea preserves, for the public good, our natural resources on a key stretch of our waterfront and creates a new platform for these institutions that have played such an important role in our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, for your excellent talks, the excellent photos, and your bravery and courage and not being afraid to speak truth to power. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Lesley Lewis. She's going to speak about science at Ontario Science Centre and Ontario Place. Lesley Lewis was the CEO of Ontario Science Centre from 1998 to 2014. Under her leadership, the centre successfully extended its audience reach and relevance and undertook major capital renewal. She was a board member and chair of ASTC, the Global Association of Science Centres based in Washington, and served on the boards of the Canadian Association of Science Centres, Giant Screen Theatre Association, and Tourism Toronto. Prior executive leadership roles included Executive Director of the Ontario Heritage Foundation and Executive Director of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Since 2014, Lesley has worked in an advisory role with science centres and museums around the world. Lesley, thank you.
Thank you, Norm, and thank you to the Ontario Place for All group for inviting the Ontario Science Centre to be part of this evening and part of this whole pressure. Moving the Ontario Science Centre to Ontario Place is a mistake, but it's a mistake that has created an exciting opportunity, which is what we're hearing about now, and where we can go from here. So first of all, being me, I want to talk about the mistake and then say something about the exciting opportunity. When Premier John Robarts chose to build a new museum as a centennial gift to the people of Ontario, he chose to do it in the geographic center of Toronto, not downtown. That was a visionary choice. So too was choosing architect Ray Moriyama to create an iconic building. In partnership with chief designer Taizo Miyake, Ray broke the mold of a traditional museum filled with objects to create one of the world's first interactive science centers. Globally, right now, there are more than 3,000 science centers built according to that Ontario Science Centre model. Since the Science Centre opened in 1969, it's welcomed more than 52 million visitors. For many years, it was the most visited cultural attraction in this city. It sparked the imagination of over 9 million students. It's created world-renowned exhibits, experiences, and traveling exhibitions. It's won international awards and has museum clients around the world. And finally, it's formed a unique bond with the communities of Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park, two neighborhoods that have been traditionally underserved in this city. If today you Google the world's top 10 science museums, the Ontario Science Centre will appear. That's guaranteed. Governments often use the term world-class to describe bold initiatives. How sadly ironic, then, that at a time when science literacy has never been more important, when we're facing issues like pandemic and climate change, this province is now seeking to decimate one of the world's top science museums. The Premier has said that a new centre at Ontario Place will increase attendance, particularly from tourists, but he's offered no evidence of that. We do know, however, that today most cities of any size have their own science centre, and so attracting tourists requires unique offerings. For example, Science North in Sudbury offers tours of a decommissioned nickel mine. The California Science Centre hosts one of the 2 remaining space shuttles. But in the RFP for the new center, which is of course combined with the parking garage, the proposed large-scale immersive experiences were designated as optional, unfunded Science Center Plus. That's really strange wording because in fact it's Science Center minus when you compare it to the current Science Center. Without unique experiences, things that they can't experience in their own local science center, it is unlikely that tourists will be drawn to a new OSC that's half the size of what we have now. And frankly, the proposed 200,000 square foot building is simply not big enough for a growing region of 6 million people, let alone tourists. Let me just give you a brief example. In 2011 in Calgary, the Spark Science Centre opened. They serve a catchment area of 1.5 million people, and it's 153,000 square feet. Here we've got a catchment of 6 million and growing. So, does the current Science Centre need updating? Without question. The center is working to recover from the pandemic when it was closed for a year and a half. The never-ending construction of the Eglinton LRT has negatively impacted visitor access, and there's a very serious backlog of deferred maintenance. But that's where the conversation gets exciting. We can reinvest in our iconic Science Centre at Don Mills in Eglinton. We can address the long-standing maintenance issues and capitalize on the new LRT, which will make access easier. And then on Ontario Place, let's create a satellite science center that takes advantage of Ontario Place's incomparable location, perhaps with a focus on Ontario's unique position with 250,000 lakes that contain 20% of the world's fresh water. Or perhaps a science center focused on climate change. Now, that's exciting. We've got the vision, we've heard it today, and now what we have to do is make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lesley. I agree. Let's make it happen. Thank you for your key role in keeping the Ontario Science Centre in the iconic space that it is, and keeping it in such great condition that I was able to enjoy it with family that was out of town who didn't want to drive all the way downtown to go to the Science Centre. So thank you very much for your role in all of that. Next up, we have someone else who cares very much about the Science Centre, and his name is Jason Ash, and he's going to speak about Ontario Science Centre and the view from the neighborhood. Jason Ash is the co-founder and co-chair of Save Our Science Centre, a grassroots organization that aims to keep the Ontario Science Centre open in Flemington and Thorncliffe Park for all Ontarians to enjoy. Thank you for your work, Jason.
Okay, thanks very much, Norm. Yes, my name's Jason Ash. I'm from the grassroots group Save Ontario Science Centre. Our website, if anybody would like to know, is savesciencecentre.wordpress.com. We are really thrilled to have been linked up with Norm, with Ken, with everyone here. The friendship's tremendous, the shared vision is tremendous, and combined with the Greenbelt, we hope we can win this for all of Ontario. That being said, I guess what I'd like to start off with is maybe for the audience in the room, a little love for Ontario Science Centre. Everybody who's taken their grandchild, children to Science Centre and absolutely enjoyed it, can we give a round of applause? All right, there you go. Perfect. And I'm sure there's lots of thumbs up online as well. We'll track that later. Obviously, I should say as well that, this is very much a passion project of mine. Floyd is with me tonight, Floyd Ruskin, who many of you might know from Park for All, who's helping a lot in this project. Eshrat is over at the side there. Eshrat's from the Flemington Park community. Thank you for coming. This really took our community, it was a real shock to us. And when you think about the Ontario Science Centre, and I don't want to repeat so much of what has already been said and said so well tonight, it really was the perfect location. And when you think about Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park, don't think about them today, but think about them 60 years ago. Because Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park were built coincidentally with the Science Centre. Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park have always been dense, multi-residential, hugely populated neighborhoods surrounded by the Don Valley and surrounded by great science and educational programming. And literally generations and generations of Flemington and Thorncliffe Park residents, wherever they came from. They might have come from East York. They might have come from Afghanistan. They might have come from Etobicoke. They might have come from the Philippines. But literally generations of Canadians have treasured the Science Centre. And it's the built form Ken's talked about tonight, the potential, the catchment potential, 90,000 more units, or a notion of that. But even today, by conservative estimates, and not progressive conservative estimates, I might add, there's 50,000 people in both those communities, possibly 60,000 or higher, depending on what numbers you look at. And the population is much younger than it is for the rest of the city of Toronto. About 40% of Thorncliffe and Flemington Park are young people and youth, so everything from age 0 up to early 20s. And the population's only growing, unlike a lot of census tracts in the city of Toronto that might be compressing a bit right now, particularly in some downtown areas. So when you think about a science centre, and to Lesley's point about wanting and having a great track record of the Ontario Science Centre bringing locals in, as opposed to tourists who will only come for the next big thing, why wouldn't you want to keep the Science Centre in Thorncliffe and Flemington? That's our next generation, and our previous next generations have created some compelling, accomplished professionals who've driven innovation. And they might not always say, I'm from Flemington, I'm from Thorncliffe, or I visited the Science Centre, but we know who they are, right? We can all think of somebody who grew up with the Science Centre and has done something amazing. So it really doesn't make sense from that perspective. And in terms of, additionally, perfect location, when it was conceived in 1967, completed in 1969, part of it was it being the geographic center of the city of Toronto. Maybe it's not the geographic center of the GTA, but what holds true to it, as it did then, for the car lovers out there, easy access from the 401, easy access from the 404, easy access from the Don Valley Parkway, right? And no getting stuck in downtown traffic and expensive parking, right? But it's only going to get better, and it's only going to get better for Thorncliffe and Flemington, and for the Science Centre if it stays in the location. Yes, we know we're going to have the Ontario line with 2 stops, Flemington Park Station at the south end of the Science Centre, and the Science Centre Station. Ironic name. By the same token, before that, we will have Eglinton Crosstown. And we do tend to conceive of the Eglinton Crosstown as a Toronto line, because in many ways it is. But it's also a regional line. In the West End, it's going to connect with the Barrie GO line. There'll be an interchange for that. It will connect with the Kitchener GO line. It's going to connect at Kennedy Station with the Stouffville line. And when the Eglinton West Crosstown the West Extension is built, which is another issue on its own, it will connect with the Mississauga Transitway. And what that means is that for a price of a transit fare, somebody from Square One, a family from Square One, can come on a 1, perhaps 2-seat ride to Don Mills and Eglinton, to the Science Centre. Someone from Barrie or Bradford can come all the way down the line with their family and avoid Highway 400 traffic. Someone can come from Kitchener-Waterloo or Guelph or any of those locations, Acton, any of those locations on a GO Transit fare plus a transfer to the TTC. And the same for Markham, Unionville, and Points East. So it was a good location with tremendous architecture and fabulous scientific programming in 1969, and it's only going to get better in 2023. We just have to reinvest in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. It is such a common thread and a common fight. We have to fight for our public spaces and reinvest in them. I mean, they're there and they don't, to rebuild these will cost oodles more than simply reinvesting in what we have, to say nothing about the embodied carbon and the climate change issues that come up. But we are going to fight together and we are going to win this fight together. Save Ontario Science Centre, Ontario Place for All, and all Ontarians will get together. We will win this thing. We are moving on now to a moderated panel, so if all the speakers could come up into these chairs, and we're just going to have a bit of a free-flowing discussion now, followed by a Q&A with your questions that were submitted virtually, and then some in person too. Oh, we have some microphones. That's great. Okay, the first question. In Alex Bozakovic's excellent article today about the mega spa in Ontario Place, he noted there was a time when public buildings were the most prestigious jobs architects could get, with results like the Ontario Science Centre, Ontario Place, and our City Hall. There's been a decline in quality of our public buildings, which I noted firsthand as a school board trustee, with new schools looking largely cookie cutter. What has contributed to this decline of quality and care in public buildings, and what have we lost as a result? Anybody can go ahead and take that if you like.
Thank you. We've lost the will of the governments who are commissioning these projects in terms of the values, the value proposition with these buildings. I think it's not universally true that public buildings are, some are excellent buildings, but they tend to be in the minority. And that also tends to be with a more enlightened client. Notwithstanding that, I really truly believe that they are still what Alex describes them as, the most prestigious commissions. To work in the public domain is the highest ambition. And I also believe that this is not a belief universally held by architects, but I do believe this, that we are citizens first and architects second, and that our higher commitment and obligation is to the public good.
Thank you. Second question. So in Ontario Place and the Ontario Science Centre, we're seeing public spaces hit around a 50-year lifespan. And then the government swoops in and attempts to privatize them, saying things like there's nothing worth saving. Is this a worrying trend that we're seeing elsewhere? And what can we do to oppose this concerning view?
Yeah, this is a well-known technique, and I'm going to apply it to what developers did and do. It used to be called blockbusting. So if you wanted to take over a neighborhood, demolish the neighborhood, you would find a friendly local motorcycle gang and move them in and let them trash the buildings, make people afraid, and so people then demonize the buildings and they want to do whatever that new thing is. And I think there's a really discouraging moment now, and I want to make the connection that David started to make between the Greenbelt and what's happening there and what's happening at the Science Centre and at Ontario Place. And that is, in order to respond to a desire to turn these places over to commercial interests, to privatize public space, to get access to enormously valuable real estate, to monetize it, not for public benefit, but for private benefit, you have to make people feel that there's something wrong with it, that it is failing, that it doesn't deserve to be saved. And I think what we have seen is a massive PR campaign to persuade people that that's the case. And one of the shocking things is when Minister Kinga Surma actually said, when she was talking about the Ontario Place, she said, when I drive by on Lakeshore Boulevard, I can see it's a wreck. Well, Minister, get out of your car. And I mean, I think we need to be, on the one hand, incredibly vigilant and depressed by what's going on. We also have to be heartened by the fact that all of us are here tonight and we're all here online, and people really are stepping up and saying, wait a minute, these things have great inherent value. You have to open your eyes and see what's there. And this is, it's an existential moment, I think, for us in this province. We have a microcosm at Ontario Place and Ontario Science Centre. We have a macrocosm affecting the whole Greenbelt, but it's basically the same thing.
Thank you. So a question for David Crombie. So what does this sort of taking away of public space and this sort of attack on our cities say about the current state of our democracy and kind of the impotence of cities in the face of these challenges?
I guess if you're a pessimist, you would think that somehow we've reached a low trough recently in the democratic process. If you're an optimist, you think it's already there, always. My own view is looking at the history of Toronto, and I'm teaching a little course, having a little fun with it since 1945 up at Glendon, and I've been going through a lot of material, and a lot of it came back. One of the lessons I've learned out of it, just preparing these lectures, is that it's episodic. Democracy is a self-starting thing, and so you may not think it's working, but so long as the institutions are available to get out there and get it done, to protest and get it done, to bring forward alternatives, all of that, it's still there. Those institutions are still there. So it's still up to people to pick themselves up and join the parade that says we got to change things. We've done that in the city, and I can give you many examples if you like. But it does take self-starting folks at the democratic level. So if you're looking for an answer, is democracy still alive? Look around you.
I'm looking around this room, and I'm looking at the 850 or so folks on the virtual session, and democracy appears to be very much alive. Thank you, David. The next question is for Lesley Lewis. Could you tell us more about what will be lost by moving the Science Center to a half-sized facility, and what could a waterfront satellite location contribute given the current existential crisis of climate change?
A simple question.
We like to be straight shooters around here.
There is so much that will be lost if the Ontario Science Centre is moved. And I can't begin, Norm, to list more of those things. And I spoke to some of them already. But just let me pick on one thing that really sets the Science Centre apart, which should be really important to all of us in this room. One of the things that is often said about cultural institutions is that they tend to be white middle-class institutions. And the Ontario Science Centre is not. The Ontario Science Centre, when you look at our visitation, and I'm sure it hasn't changed in the 9 years since I left, it reflects the Toronto subway. Everyone that you see on the subway, you see at the Ontario Science Centre. Did you know that Grenoble School, the children speak 60 different languages at home? And that is the school closest to the Science Centre. But it is not just the local communities that give the Science Centre that kind of diversity. I believe that it reflects an openness and an embracing of all of our community that is it's the basic approach that the Science Centre has always taken. Now, it can take that when it moves to Ontario Place, if they move it to Ontario Place, but there is one little problem. The Ontario Science Centre is known for its connection to community. People talk about that around the world. They talk about the diversity. We are the envy of that. Well, if it moves to Ontario Place, it's actually a long way from any community. And the closest communities, as I understand it, tend to be people who aren't necessarily of an age where they're going to be interested in coming to the Science Centre. I could well be wrong on that. In terms of what the Science Centre could do on climate change at Ontario Place, one thing I'm not is a scientist. I'm very passionate about the kind of work that the Science Centre does. I can't tell you what they would do on climate change, but I can tell you that they would do it in a very engaging way. They would do it in a way that appeals not just to kids that come with their schools, not just to families, but also to adults. And one of the things that we need more of is information so that everybody understands what climate change means. It's not just about the fires, but it is about the fires. And so I think an area, a satellite that focuses on that focuses on fresh water, would be a breath of fresh air in this city.
Okay, great. I appreciate that very thorough and thoughtful response, Lesley. Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to move on to questions. So we'll take questions from the audience, and we're also going to be taking questions from the folks tuned in virtually. Why don't we start with an in-person question? If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Mike will be coming by with the mic. There we are.
Okay. Hi. So I'm not familiar with the technical aspects, but one other thing that ties the two sites together are IMAX screens. IMAX is an Ontario technology, world-renowned, built here, again, invested by the province in an investment. We have two screens. We've got a legacy of film and film production and creative industries. So is that an opportunity to tie those two sites together? I don't know. I see an iconic image of Ontario Place, and when I walk by, I see pieces of wood tapped in there. So I wondered, what is the suggestions or what are the opportunities for the screens?
Great question. I don't know if anybody on the panel would like to address that. I can take a whack if you don't want. If you can't. I mean, something special.
No,
Oh, you
go
got it?
ahead.
Okay. Yeah, a special thing about Ontario Place was just how it highlighted and celebrated Ontario-based organizations, including IMAX. I mean, that was their first permanent installation at Ontario Place. What a great way to highlight Ontario-based businesses and, in some way reflect back Ontario, which is one of our major issues with this Austrian mega spa, which in no way reflects Ontario in any way, shape, or form. So I definitely think there's an opportunity for Ontario organizations to be, promoted there. And I mean, to me, it's part of the MO of Ontario Place. I don't know if anybody else would like to take it.
I will simply add that what a great opportunity for the satellite of the Science Center to actually use the screen, the IMAX screen, and make that, along with the pods and along with the West Island, part of the Science Center experience.
On a personal note, I remember shortly after I'd immigrated to Canada, seeing this extraordinary film, North of Superior. Remember that one?
Yes.
That was the first one, and what an impression it made on me. And I don't think you can discount, given we have over 50% of our population is from abroad. That was a very powerful way of introducing our province.
Thank you. Thank you for those answers. Oh, is there somebody else who'd like to go?
I was just going to actually make a statement. It's really. Sorry, can we get a microphone here? Oh, sure. Michael?
And then we'll go to a virtual question after this.
Yeah, so it's actually more of a statement, and I think it was really nice to hear this sort of, the alternative. Maybe the other way of looking at this is to look at proof points and maybe weaponize the proposal and look around the world, look at other thermal spas, look at the deals, how much the governments locally have put into it, and also take that proposal and extrapolate the cash flows and look at how it actually reflects over a 90-year period to the Ontario taxpayers, because what you want to do in this is, yes, provide an alternative, but also poke holes at the current existing and follow the money. And I think that's really important in trying to conceptualize and extrapolate this, because I think that's the missing part of this. And there's something going on in this, because it's, one, the lease agreement is very secretive, and maybe there's a way of raising money to actually sue to open it up. But also with the Ontario Science Centre is very unusual, where you had, I think, the construction family Desparis that was actually bought land across. And then also, I mean, I don't want to get political, but Anna Bailao made an announcement just before it saying that, maybe we can build houses on Ontario Science Centre. It just very, very funny. And to me, as an outsider, as a citizen looking at this, it doesn't add up. So just a suggestion, not a question.
Thanks for the statement, and we'd love to see a business case from the province. They've provided none. So, thank you. Message received. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for the statement. We have just a question virtually. So how can we get allies outside of Ontario to join our efforts? What about allies who the government might listen to? And that's part of the effort why we're here tonight. So, David Crombie and the Friends of the Golden Horseshoe wrote an excellent letter to the mayor opposing the Ontario Place plans, and we need more people speaking up and endorsing, a reset of this whole thing through a better idea. You can go to ontarioplace.com/a-better-idea to endorse, and if you want to push your elected representatives to support a better idea, it's ontarioplaceforall.com/take-action. Thank you. So I can go now to another question on site. So just please raise your hands and. Okay, sorry. So we'll go to the center. We'll try to alternate a little bit. You go right ahead.
The question is, we've seen how really, with the experience of the Osgood Hall trees and the Moss Park trees, how they'll show up early one morning, and then all of a sudden you're dealt with a fait accompli. So I guess on a tactical level, my question is, how do we make sure we don't wake up one morning with 850 trees mowed down?
Yeah. It's a great question. We have started a neighborhood watch, so if anybody sees anything unusual going on at Ontario Place, we have a hashtag OP Watch. And we are going to start to mobilize a group that's able to take action should they come in one day and start to try to take down trees. So, we have our eye on that, and we have also raised it with, people at City Hall, including a mayor's office, that were very concerned about this, and they need to take immediate action because it's quite possible they might move in September to take down those trees. And, we have these trees up in just these beautiful trees in this gallery here, and 50-year mature trees, and it would just break everybody's heart to lose 864 urban trees. They are so hard to grow in an urban setting, and even harder on the waterfront. So thank you for the question. Yep.
I've been asked all this. Yeah? Yeah, I have a question. Can I have it?
I've been asked.
For any reason?
I don't know.
Okay. I have a question, and it is this. How can we make this more of a political issue? You mentioned the case of the Greenberg. People say, oh, will the minister resign? Will he not? No, we need to ask who's going to go to jail. I mean, this is, the Auditor General said it's over $8 billion. I mean, more clear where it is. You buy a land that it costs 100, and then the magic one says, oh, it's not agriculture, now it's urban, now it's worth 1,000. I mean, every symptom. In the case of Ontario Place, if you do the numbers, the spa will never be profitable.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that that is a casino. It's not a spa. So why is it that the word casino has not even come up? When it's very clear, all of a sudden, a 95-year lease, the spa was broke, and oh my God, the casinos are going to save the citizens millions of dollars because who wants to take over this 9-floor gigantic building the size of BMO Field? Right. Also, if Ford is going to do a parking lot, $600 million for a casino, it would be impossible. But if it's for a spa, and then 2, 3, 4 years turns out that it's for a casino, then, I mean, everything is pointing out in that direction. I think that we do need to open those holes. So my question is, what can we do to make this a political issue? For example, we gotta get more immigrants. I'm an immigrant. We gotta get more immigrants on this. I'm not young. We need to get more young people.
Yes, indeed.
We need to get more environmentalists. We need to get people on public health. We need to broaden the coalition. This is not a legal issue. If we think it's going to be a legal issue, they're going to run over and do it. We got to make it a hot political potato.
Yes.
How do we make that? What can we do? The 150 here, over 800 people online. What can we do to help you make this a real political issue? We need to stop being politically correct, be respectful but not politically correct, and come up with some of these. This is urgent.
Yeah,
this is urgent, and I'm so happy that finally the citizens seem to have woken up at this issue because there have been so many others, such as the LRT underground and so on, that is billions wasted. Finally, we're waking up, but what can we do?
Yeah. That was an excellent question by our urban planner and amazing advocate Gil Penalosa, which is what can we do to broaden this coalition, bring this fight all across Ontario and win this fight? Because ultimately it's probably more of a political battle than it is a legal one. So I totally agree. I notice MP Mary Margaret McMahon has a thought.
I have a bit of an answer to that.
Sure.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Oh my God, this panel is amazing, and Ontario Place for All is doing phenomenal work. So Gil, great question. So here's the thing. A lot of people think, oh, it's just a Toronto issue, which it is not. We know that for sure. I grew up in Collingwood, and I remember coming down with my school for field trips with my Brownie group, Girl Guides. We came down to the Science Centre. It is an Ontario-wide issue. This is a gem in the province, and we can't let it go. So we need to figure out a way, you know, with the Green Belt, there are protests outside the MPP's offices all across Ontario. So is that something to consider? I don't want to add to your workload, Norm. You guys are doing phenomenal work. I will say you're doing exceptional work. We are getting hundreds and hundreds of emails, which I love. Fill up my inbox, oh my God, and fill up everyone's inbox. And we personally answer them. I hope others do that for you. I have met with, I like to cover all my bases, so I have met with, first of all, I met with King of Surma, Minister Surma, and a million staffers, and then I met with Ontario Place for All, Norm, and et al., amazing, and then Therma asked to meet with me, and I said, tour me around, and I showed up at the West Island, and they didn't show up. Their lobbyist group did, in the pouring rain. Bullshit, okay? Pardon my French. And then they came and met with me. I like to hear all sides of the story so I know how to hone my argument, because this is not going to happen. We are not having some in a climate emergency. We're not having a 13-story glass box on the waterfront. No way in hell. I will be down there, chain myself to those trees, and we are saving it as parkland.
Thank you. So, you know, you can go to our website now. Thank you so much for that amazing answer, MPP McMahon, and for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you, and for listening. So you can go to ontarioplaceforall.com/takeaction, and you can enter your address, and that will send out a communication directly to your MPP. And then later on, we can take a look at all of those, and where we have support, we can start organizing protests at MPP's offices. And you know, we have now MPPs from all across Ontario raising this issue at Queen's Park, which really makes me feel more like this is becoming a provincial issue. But we need your help to make this a bigger issue. Yes, we'll take a question from this person who I might know just a little bit.
This is actually, I think we have to get away from that. So this is a question and an ask. I guess so, Mary Margaret, how can we actually, do you think, tap in through things like your caucus across the province? Because I'm just wondering why the issue of $650 million. No, you've got to get away from here.
Yeah.
Yes. $650 million for a spa, for pampered spa goers in Toronto, isn't raising a ruckus in the province where emergency rooms are closing, where there isn't enough long-term care capacity, where schools don't have supplies. Like, how do we actually get people to, outrage, saying that money should not be going into this? We need money like that in our communities for real problems, not invented ones. Nobody asked for a spa. Nobody said they needed a spa. The idea that the spa is a wellness center when the park itself is a natural wellness center is ridiculous. But what ideas do you have? And I guess also, what ideas do people in this room and on the, in cyberspace, have for contacting their friends, their families, relations who live outside of Toronto, who will actually call their MPPs and say, this sucks. This is not what Ontario is about. So, maybe people here have some ideas about that too. But
I will add that David Crombie once told me to talk to 5 people about jets at the island airport, and before I knew it, I spoke to 500 people about it. So I don't know if the panel has any ideas or suggestions here.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple of things relating to comments, starting with the gentleman over there who was really saying follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
I
Greenbelt situation. I guarantee there's a scandal somewhere there.
Yeah.
Just get a financial accountant, extrapolate the numbers, and then make a couple of examples.
So I think the thing we have to overcome is fatalism. That this is a fait accompli, you can make all the noise you want, it's going to happen anyway, and you may as well just go along to get along. And that is a prevailing sentiment. I think we have to break through on that. And I think there are 2 hooks that can really make this a political issue, as Gil Peñalosa was suggesting. One is follow the money, and Cindy Wilkie's comment about the $650 million is just so outrageous. The other is follow the environment. And the fact that this mega facility, palm trees under glass in a hermetically sealed box on Lake Ontario, is at a time of climate crisis, is as crazy as destroying the Greenbelt. It's gotten people upset. It's highly visible when you talk about cutting down 850 50-year-old trees. People can relate to that. So I think we have to have messaging that is clear, simple, and tangible to reach out to people and make them see just how bizarre, strange, and inappropriate this is.
Yeah. Certainly been hearing about from people who don't like the corruption, who think that maybe we should have an ER in Minden instead of, a 5-story underground parking garage at Ontario Place. So those are connections that you can make with places around Ontario. Yes, go right ahead.
On the topic of follow the money, the day Doug Ford was elected, I was on my bike, I hit the gates of Ontario Place, and they were locked. That tells me that this deal was cooked before he was elected. I don't know how to prove that, but on the follow the money, I think the corruption here is big. I don't know what is going on, but there is something really, really wrong. And talking about, I think talking about what a mistake this is, and it's a bad design and all that kind of stuff, is all contributes to it. But it was before this deal was made behind closed doors, before this government was elected.
Yeah, we've asked the Auditor General to audit value for money and the way this deal came together, and it didn't make it for this year, but hopefully it'll make it for next year in light of what the Auditor General learned on the Greenbelt, which is pretty scathing stuff. So for sure there's something to investigate there. So I think we might have time for one more question from the audience, if there's any other questions. Okay, you, go right ahead.
I just have a logistical question. What is the current construction situation right now? Because when I went a few months ago, they had barricaded that. So I'm just wondering, how much progress have they made?
Yeah, so they put a fence up that blocks the trail from West Island to Trillium Park, and it was up to volunteers to discover this at Ontario Place for All. There was no announcement. This fence came up to block the trail. In fact, I was there one day and I actually ran into Gil Peñalosa, who was jogging and came up against the fence. So there was no notification from the government, and I don't see any construction happening. So is cruelty the point here? I'm not sure, but for sure that trail that everybody relied on for the past few years has been closed down. That connects the two, but you can still go to West Island by going straight to West Island and visit Trillium Park by going straight to Trillium Park. So you're not fully blocked off, but it's annoying. And you know what, we're actually, we've hit 8:30 now, so that's all we had planned for this evening. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank the staff at 401 Richmond, and in particular Elise Rogers, who helped to put up these amazing photo boards that are around us. And for being such excellent hosts. For those in person, I'd ask you to stick around for a little reception. And just wanted to point out that there's a donation box at the table for your left. And those on virtual, you can go to ontarioplace.com if you want to donate to our cause to fight to save Ontario Place and the Science Centre with a better idea. And please pick up some buttons, brochures. You can buy a t-shirt for $30. And I'd like to thank the Ontario Place for All Steering Committee and our volunteers who are all wearing Ontario Place for All t-shirts. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, and that concludes the evening.